All right, so I'm joined by Kwani A. Lunis, who is the social media producer at NBC 10 Boston, and you can also catch her on the A-List podcast with A. Sherrod Blakely and Kwani A. Lunis. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kwani. I'm really excited to talk about Isaiah Thomas with you. And
Yes,
without
thanks for having
further
me.
Thank you so much. And without further ado, I'll just hop right into the episode. So obviously, 2016-17 Isaiah was just such a joy to watch. And just so people listening kind of have an idea of what we're looking at here, he played 76 games that season. He was averaging 28.9 points a game on 46% shooting, 38% from three, and 90% from free throw. And he also got 5.9 assists per game during that season. But what I want to start with you is like when Isaiah Thomas in 2016-17, those Celtics come up, what is the first thing that comes to mind for you? Like, what is the sort of essence of all of that?
There are so many parts of Isaiah that stand out for that year. You have the King in the Fourth, which I'm not exactly sure where that nickname came from, but I
Mm.
know when I was at NBC Sports Boston at the time, we really tapped into that nickname. There were memes and social media just erupted every time he got into the game during the fourth quarter because that's when he'd have a breakout game. Even though he'd be consistent for the first three, every fourth quarter, especially when they needed him, he was there. It got to a point where the Patriots, I remember during one of the Patriots games, I actually tweeted this, not to toot my own horn, but I remember tweeting, I think it's time for the Patriots to put Isaiah Thomas into the fourth quarter because they definitely needed some offensive help that game. And Isaiah Thomas was the one that was willing to do it. But another more somber note to think of when you think about that season is him losing his sister and being able to still have a breakout game after all of that occurred. He ended up I can't remember how many points he had that game specifically, but the fact that he put himself out there and was willing to be on the floor for his teammates in a time where he should have had the chance to just go back home and be with family. He just showed that he really cared about Boston in that moment, and despite the fact that he did lose another part of his family, he saw Boston as family as well, and he was willing to do whatever he needed to keep that team together at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like when I think of that Celtics team as a whole, and especially Isaiah Thomas, like resiliency is just the ringing theme because they were all so. I feel like the team just went from sort of being in these late fourth quarter situations and kind of coming away with wins by being scrappy to like really imposing dominance over all of the teams. And obviously with Isaiah losing his sister and then returning and playing so well in that playoff series. And he even, I think he was at the same series that he lost his tooth as well, or he like chipped
Yes.
it or something like, and he still was just really willing to put it all.
He embraced it. I
Yeah.
remember that because we also made a meme of that moment,
Mhm.
and it was just like a circle with a little headband number four on it, and just like a black spot in the
Yeah, yeah,
spot
yeah.
where his teeth was supposed to be. And he didn't. He smiled through it all.
Yeah, and that's I feel like that is something too that Isaiah that really sticks out to me is he was just so charismatic to watch, like both on the court and like in all his post game stuff. Like he just really was such a great personality to for the team to be around. And so I mean, sort of in that same vein, like that, I think that Celtics team has like a really sort of special. People remember them really fondly, and like maybe that's a little bit of nostalgia goggles, but like do you feel like that team sort of had like a special, I think it had a really like special energy to it. How do you feel about that, you know?
I agree with that. I think a lot of people when they think about that Celtics team, that's the reason why even though Isaiah Thomas is technically not in the league now, I did read that he signed with the NBA affiliate G League.
Hmm.
Everyone, when they think about Isaiah Thomas, that's the season they think about, and they think about that passion. And not even just Boston fans. I think everyone around the league that saw him play during that season, any team that has common sense wants a player with that kind of passion. I think the biggest barrier for him was the fact that he did have that lingering hip injury that eventually was, I think, the reason why he's not playing in the league today. But he had the passion despite not being the tallest player in the league. He had the ability to just score and figure out a way to, despite all of the odds that are against him, make an impact on that team and on that roster. So I think that's one of the teams where you look back and you're like, Jaylen Brown, I think that was his inaugural year in the NBA, and everyone's looking at that roster and they're like, the passion was there. There was talent there. That was a team that everyone wanted to see go further because they weren't supposed to. That's a
Yeah.
team where eventually there's going to be a 30 for 30 or some kind of documentary about what if I told you this team didn't make it to the NBA finals, because they really did, I think, have the passion wherever the talent may have lacked, so to speak. They had the passion behind it that I think could have filled the void. And I think they could have won a championship that year.
I think so too. I mean, Golden State, I think, was really, really lucky and
Despite
grateful
Golden
that
State.
they had to play the Cavs in that finals, because
Mhm.
I don't know if they would have had anything for the Celtics. And I agree. I feel like that team, like, they really wanted to like go to war for each other on the court
Mhm.
every single night, and they would absolutely back each other up. And just like that, that was Jalen's rookie year, and that was still when like Marcus and Terry were a lot younger, and obviously Terry Rozier was still with the team,
Mhm.
and it was such a fun team to watch.
In the year before, the Celtics actually broke, I don't know if you remember, they broke that 54 game streak for the Warriors. So it's not like that
Yeah,
Celtics team couldn't have matched up. Maybe not 7, but maybe 5 games. It would have been, I think, a pretty compelling series.
I agree. It's interesting because I remember that was sort of like peak Golden State for their
Yeah.
dynasty, and the Celtics just they would go into Oracle and win games, and it's just it's crazy to
They knew
think.
how to play up to their opponents.
Yeah, they do. Um, so, and then just obviously hear a little bit more of the accolades, because I think it really speaks to Isaiah's willpower. He was the January Player of the Month. He won 2
Mhm.
Player of the Week awards, second team All NBA, and
Yeah.
he wound up finishing 5th in MVP voting that season, which is just kind of ridiculous. I mean, how often is it that like a second round player is making All NBA teams above guys like Chris Paul? Like he's really just he's showing just
Not
how
just second round though, last pick in that 2011 draft, which he makes sure to not let people forget it. But I just find his story to be so compelling when you look at how his time in Boston ended, getting traded for the #1 pick in that same class. So
yeah,
he really found a way to prove everyone wrong. He was like, he had a checklist going, I think, when you look at that season.
absolutely. There was an interview, I think something Chris Forsberg published for ESPN
Okay.
that I was reading, that
Uh-huh.
had a quote from Isaiah. I think it was heading into that season. He said, "I want to be an All-Star, I want to be All NBA, and I want to be an
Yes.
MVP." And just
Yes.
like he has such sheer just willpower. You can see it
Mhm.
on the court and just the way that he plays, and it's really fascinating to watch, and also just so cool, that he was able to succeed to the heights that he did.
Yeah, and the MVP conversation, I think at the beginning, a lot of people looked at him and they were like, okay, like,
Yeah.
sure. But then it got to a point towards, I think, like January, February of that season, where people were like, oh, snap, like, we're really sleeping on him.
Yeah.
Again, he was like, you know what? I'm gonna quiet out the haters and I'm gonna do what I have to do. And honestly, I think again, going back to the potential of that team, he could have been legitimately considered for that title if it wasn't for a Russell Westbrook and James
Mm.
Harden season. Like, you're not gonna be able to compete with them, at the end of the day. But he still made a name for himself that season.
He did so well for himself. And, sort of jumping off of that, I have the stats, and obviously Isaiah being 5'10. I mean, one, I
Right.
remember being 16, and like that I was 16 watching this season,
Mm.
and I'm 5'10. So I was seeing Isaiah and I was like, maybe I should like, pick up a ball, work on my handle
Right.
a
It's not
little
too late for me.
bit. Yeah, exactly. And then
Also, no shade to Isaiah Thomas, but I am pretty sure his numbers are padded because
oh,
I don't think
absolutely.
he's 5'10.
Basketball sneakers are definitely helping
Yeah,
him.
he's more on the 5'6" spectrum,
You
I think.
think? Wow. Okay.
I'll give him 7, 5'7", but
Okay.
he's, yeah, not 5'10". Definitely not 5'10".
That makes it honestly more impressive. Well, so
Right. Like, why not tap into the fact that you were shorter than people expected?
exactly, it makes it, people would be more impressed. But so sort of,
Right.
I wanted to look at their finishing inside of 10 feet, because the other 3 guards who were on the first and second team All NBAs were Steph Curry, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden.
Mm.
So out of those, just sort of rank in order who you think was finishing the best inside 10 feet, and best to worst.
This is just based off
Well,
my
yeah,
opinion.
sort of. I think, yeah.
I would imagine. Well, that's a tricky one. Probably Ooh. In order, I would say James Harden, Westbrook, and Steph.
And then
I'm
Isaiah.
thinking for the right season. What do you think?
So the Steph was actually first. He was
Okay,
finishing.
I was gonna go with. I always go. Never doubt Steph. I was gonna say Steph first, but then I was like, was that the right season?
Yeah, it's never a bad idea to put Steph
Just
first. So
bank on Steph.
it was Steph, and then you were right with Harden being.
Okay,
Steph was at
second.
66 and Harden was at 65 and a half. So I
That makes
would
sense.
also maybe
Yeah,
give that to you.
yeah.
And then Isaiah was actually third. He was shooting 62% from inside 10 feet, and Russ was at 61, which is just crazy to think about. Like,
Everyone's just so close.
yeah, but like he's finishing at the same clip as like literal MVP Russell Westbrook and
Yes.
Steph, like, and Russ when he was still such a good athlete, and he's still like able to get inside and find all of those ways to finish, which is just
Mhm.
such a testament, I think, to just how good he's
Wow.
playing.
Telling you that documentary about that season, if it's not specifically about Isaiah Thomas, it would be a crime
It
because
would
I think
be.
that's a season worth documenting in depth.
I think honestly, just the team, the Celtics from sort of the Isaiah year and the year after both could have their own like
Yeah.
30 for 30s because that
hmm
the
Because both of those teams were expected to make it to the NBA Finals. I think
yeah.
obviously when you're in local media, there are a lot more green goggles because everyone's like, "Oh, we love this team. We're rooting for them." But I think if I try to put myself in a national lens, I think those were the two seasons where the rest of the league looked at Boston and were like, "Oh, this isn't the roster I'd expect to be at that level." But I think people gave them the respect where it was due in that sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like between the sort of like that 4-year stretch where they made 3 Eastern Conference Finals,
Mhm.
there was like sort of during those 4 years, there was not really any expectation that the Celtics would do well in the playoffs or that they would have any kind of success. And now
Mhm.
that they've made the playoffs and had so many deep runs and had so much roster turnover, it seems like there shouldn't be an expectation for them to be making the Eastern Conference Finals, but there is now, and it's just
Yes,
very
because of that
we
season, I
can
think.
thank IT for the
Yes,
for all of
set
the
the bar really high.
yeah, exactly. So then I also like to look at just to sort of contextualize further, like how it compares, his season compares to something from, another era of play. So I looked at Allen Iverson in 2001 because I thought that would be a pretty fun
Yes.
comparison.
Yeah, his
And so
idol, one of his idols at least.
exactly, yeah. And AI in that season averaged 30.1 per game with 4.5 assists and about 4 rebounds. He was shooting 42% from the floor, 32 from deep, and 81 from the free throw line, which I just think is pretty interesting because I mean, one like 30.1 points a game in 2001 is like he's blowing Isaiah's scoring out of the water.
Right.
Allen Iverson here. So like I don't think that's that crazy, but what I did think was interesting is Iverson's player efficiency rating. That I don't know how much of like a stat head you are, but his PER was 24 and
Okay.
Isaiah in that season in 2016-17 was 26.5. So
Wow.
yeah,
And that's just like everyone knows the AI era. So even if I wasn't a stat head, which I'm not, but like I know what the stats mean. I'm like, that's a
yeah.
significant. Wow. I didn't even
Yeah.
realize that.
I mean, the I think right now, Nikola Jokic is on pace for like the highest PER ever in a season, and
That's
that's like
unbelievable.
38.5. So he's only
Right. You
he's
can't touch him.
approaching like
Joking.
really crazy at 26 and a half. That's approaching like outlandish levels of play,
Yeah.
which is just, I mean, any of these stats are really insane. And then something
hmm
else I also want to point out, kind of jumping back to the king and the fourth thing, I think
hmm
you can point out really in like he was really crafting that legend in like December, January, and February because I was looking at the numbers and just in the fourth quarter alone across those 3 months, he was averaging almost 12 points a quarter. Like that like
Yeah.
it's really
It's
great.
more interesting when you look back on it because I think when you're in it, you're just like, oh, he's doing something cool. But then you look back and you're looking at even the state of the league now, and you're like, who was doing that? Who's doing that now?
Exactly. Like
As
I don't
consistently as he was.
exactly. I don't think there are any players right now. I mean, obviously like you know,
be able
somebody
to,
like Kevin Durant, if they
right.
needed him to go off for 12 every fourth quarter, he definitely could. But
Right.
they're
Steph
still
is back to his usual form. He's looking great. Like,
exactly.
but it's the usual. It's not someone like, again, IT, where no one expected it.
Exactly. Nobody was looking for him to be scoring like that. And he's
Yeah,
still
they were just all right, just handle the ball and do what you have to do, and just get us get us to like maybe a 7 seed. Like no one
yeah,
had expectations, which is probably
nobody.
the best when they don't have the expectations.
Absolutely. And then so I do want to bring us into the segment biggest blunder, which is the worst
Mhm.
game. And I actually really struggled trying to find a bad game for IT from that season. Like his lowest point total, I think, in any of the 76 games he played was like 18. Because like even when he wasn't scoring, effectively from the field, he was getting to the line. He almost always was on his off shooting nights, racking up assists. But what I did find, he had a 16, or the team rather lost by 16 points to the Hawks. And Isaiah went 4 for 21 from the floor, 1 of 6 from deep, for 19 points. He had 7 rebounds, 7 assists, but he also had 7 turnovers. And like the turnovers aren't great, but honestly, like that being your worst game from a season is really
And the
impressive.
fact that he still had 7 boards, like that's impressive.
He had
It's just a bad shooting night. It seemed like
exactly.
the drive was still there.
Exactly. And I think that really is just sort of speaks to
Dang.
how much he wanted to impact the game in any
Yeah.
way that he could.
If he knew it wasn't a good shooting night, he was like, all right, I'm gonna get these rebounds. And then again, obviously the turnovers aren't great, but that means I can't even be mad at a bad game like that in that season.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's hard. It's really
I'm
hard to
so
find
positive.
anything wrong. Yeah, and then I also do want to highlight he did have a 52-point game against the Heat. That was just absolutely crazy. He was shooting lights out with 58% from the floor, 69% from deep. He had 13 free throws and he hit all of them. And it was interesting because he had no assists in that game. And then immediately in the next game, the first one was on December 30th, and then on January 3rd, he comes back for 29 points on 56% shooting, 63% from three. He didn't miss a free throw in that game either, and he
Okay,
had
100%
15
at the
assists.
line.
So I think
8
maybe
assists?
he had 15 assists.
Oh, 15. Oh, he definitely had a pep talk with himself if someone else didn't
I'm
tell him to.
sure,
And
yeah.
said, he probably looked at that game as a failure because he didn't have any
I'm
assists in
sure.
it.
He cared.
Just
He cared.
knowing that mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. What
All right.
drive.
Well, I think that's going to wrap up the episode for us. But thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be nostalgic about that season. It was a fun season to watch.
Yeah, I'm excited for the 30-30 to come out.
Yeah, honestly, I think I should get a producer credit on it, even if I don't work there.
We'll make it happen.
Right.